Hello, friends. I hope you're out wandering through nature, exploring the natural world around you. Do you enjoy writing about your wanderings? Nature journaling is an awesome, fun way to remember all the adventures you have taken and how you felt during those journeys. If you're looking for some beautiful journals to keep track of all your wanderings, I have several available on Amazon, including some guided journals for children. Start your journey in journaling by clicking on the link in the show notes. Keep exploring the nature around you and keep journaling all your wanderings. Hey friends, Paul here. And yes, of course, this is the Nature Wanderer podcast. So if you're planning on listening to a different podcast, you're in the wrong place. But hopefully you're here for the Nature Wanderer podcast. In the wilds of my own backyard today. Now, for those of you who haven't been listening lately, you may need a refresher. I don't live out on 12 acres with all this open field behind me. And I'm in suburbia, in the wilds of my backyard in Orchard Park, New York. But I am sitting here noticing today, and I've been noticing the past few days, and actually the past week, signs of autumn. Nights are getting chillier. The leaves are starting to change color. Days are getting shorter. We were sitting out on our back porch here the other night, and it's like, when does it start getting so dark so early? I used to take forever to get dark, but days are getting shorter. The temperatures have been dropping in the evenings, so we are seeing signs of spring. And my old house up on Bixby Hill in Arcade, we didn't have many trees right in our backyard. I mean, we did have the woods, and I loved going for the hikes through the woods, but not right in our yard. We didn't have any real trees. So here, it's like there is some sunlight, okay? Like right now, half the yard is sunlight, the other half is shadowed by the trees. So lots of trees, big oak tree with apparently a blue jay in it that I just heard screaming, calling. Big London Plains tree. We got all these different conifers and some silver maple, but there's trees everywhere. And I've been actually picking up a lot of leaves lately. The leaves are starting to change. Just got back from a wedding in Baltimore, and along the roadside I was noticing a lot of the leaves are we're starting to get some color out there, and it seems early, but it's also been very dry in the Northeast here. So things are changing a little bit quicker because of the dryness too. So all these things are showing me that autumn is here. Autumn is starting, even though it's not officially autumn on the calendar. No, it does feel like it though. And another thing I've been noticing, the wildlife. Wildlife has been reacting differently. I've been seeing the squirrels, and God, do I have a lot of squirrels in my yard. But a lot of squirrels are starting to gather up seed and nuts. I did notice on one of the trees, I don't think it's right in my backyard, but it's in one of the neighbors' yards, there's starting to be a big bundle of leaves up in the tree. Squirrel home for the winter. The chipmunks have been running around with big piles of nuts in their cheeks. Big chubby cheeks. I was just watching him. He just went over to, big clump of leaves that fell off my oak tree. So he's gathering up the acorns off of it. And a lot of the leaves are still green, falling off my oak tree. Some of that is because of the squirrels. They're going after the nuts, and they chop the entire bunch off. So I've been cleaning a lot of those up lately. But they're just getting ready for the long winter ahead. Hopefully it's not a long winter. Hopefully it's not too cold, but they're getting ready. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about is, getting ready for winter and migration. That's the main topic of this episode, is migration. If you're not familiar with that term, migration is basically moving from one area to another. Now, some people think of migration as in people, which people do migrate. They'll move from one area to another. They'll go from, you get snowbirds who migrate from the northeast here all the way down to the south where it's warmer. I was just talking to my brother at the wedding I was at. As his daughter, my niece, who was getting married, and we were talking at one time about his plans for the winter, because they like to go down to New Mexico, and they spend a month or two down there each year. And so he says, yeah, they're turning snowbirds. He doesn't like Florida, and I don't blame him. I'm not a big fan of Florida either. Sorry if you're a Floridian listening to this. I'm just not the type who wants to winter down in Florida. He likes New Mexico and Los Cruces, and beautiful down there, he says. So we're thinking about maybe visiting him for a few days this winter down there. But anyhow, he's migrating. He's migrating down there, and then he'll migrate back up here, and makes the news all the time about the migrants. But we're not talking snowbirds here. We're talking about people who are escaping, like, the torture and whatever's going on in South America, and they're headed up through the Mexican border. But I'm not going to get into political stuff. But people do migrate. But we're going to talk about animals migrating. Okay? The birds and the animals around here have been acting differently. Like I said, they're starting to gather food for the winter, storing food. They're going to be caching it, C-A-C-H-E, not C-A-S-H. They're caching it or hiding it away for the winter, so they have foods for the winter, throughout the winter. So all of this is starting to happen this time of year. Birds, they're starting to fatten up. They're getting ready for their migration. Now, migration is basically moving from one place to another. And whenever you hear migration, if you're not talking about people, you're usually thinking about birds. And birds are the main migrants. There are actually a lot of different types of birds that migrate. Not all birds migrate, okay? And some birds, they just do short migrations. We get birds coming into western New York here, where I live, from Canada. So, for instance, chickadees. Get a lot of chickadees in the wintertime. And a lot of the chickadees that we're seeing, the cardinals, the blue jays, all these birds that we're seeing in the winter are usually the ones from Canada who are just coming a little further south. And the ones that are normally around here are actually headed further south down to, like, the Carolinas, Florida, Texas, some down to Mexico. So sometimes it's short migration, sometimes it's long migrations. And actually the longest migration in birds, okay, longest bird migration is actually 25,000 miles. Okay, that's the Arctic tern. Yeah, the Arctic terns, they hold the record for the longest migration at about 25,000 miles. They go from the Arctic breeding grounds down to the Antarctic in winter. That's a long trip. Yeah. Some songbirds migrate very high up in the air. Okay, altitudes between 500 and 2,000 feet up in the air. So they're migrating up with the airplanes. Yeah, they're way up there when they migrate. Now, you want to talk about high migration, though, being up high. This is just songbirds that are like 500 to 2,000 feet. Geese, vultures, everyone's seen geese migrate in that V formation. I'll talk about that a little bit later. They can actually fly, and they usually are flying at heights of like 29,000 to 37,000 feet up in the air. So they're going way up high. Yeah. Now, in order to conserve energy during migration, they are trying to catch the thermals, or the lift, off of the ground. So what happens is you have the warm air coming off of the ground, going up, and that meets the cold air up above, and it starts to drop. Okay, heat rises. So you have the heat coming off of the earth, and that's rising up. It's what we call the thermals. And the birds know about this, and they catch those thermals to give them lift. Because if you're flying, let's say you're an Arctic tern, you're going 25,000 mile journey, you're going to be exhausted. You're probably going to die from exhaustion getting down. So you have to conserve energy as much as possible. So one of the ways that these birds will conserve energy is by catching these thermals. And it just draws them up and carries them along. I remember many years ago I went down to Pennsylvania, Hawk Mountain they called it. It's in the eastern part of, I think southeastern part of Pennsylvania. And it's where the mountain ranges are. So you have the Appalachian, however you want to pronounce it, mountains down there, and the birds need to get across these mountains. So they need to do it without using too much energy, and that's where they catch the thermals. And when I went down there to see this, I went during migration season, because I've always heard you got to get to Hawk Mountain during migration. And we went down there, and there's this guy sitting there, you know, a couple of them, I think. They were up on the mountain, hundreds of people just sitting on the rocks, watching the birds go over, and this guy is just watching the birds, and he's calling out, you know, pointing up in the sky in different sections. It's like, turkey vultures at 5 o'clock. Not the time, you know, as if though it's in that direction. There were bald eagles, there were different hawks, and he's calling out all these different birds, and when you're watching them, it's like they're just soaring. They're not really flapping their wings because they're catching these thermals, and it lifts them, gives them lift over the mountains. So they just spread their wings, and it carries them up like a hot air balloon. And it allows them to fly over the mountains without a lot of energy. So a lot of songbirds who are migrating do this. They catch that lift. It saves their energy. Other birds, like I was saying, they fly at high altitudes because there's less turbulence up there. They don't have to use as much energy. It takes a lot of energy. Of course, they're using the thermals too to get up to those altitudes. But once they're up there, they can just glide along so much easier. So why are these birds migrating? Why not just stay in one spot? And like I said, it's not all birds that migrate. There are approximately 11,000 bird species on the planet. And about 2,000 of those species migrate. Not all of them are migrating. So about 2,000 out of 11,000 are. So it's not everybody, but why are they migrating? Some birds stick around, why not all of them? It's all about food. I was told when I was younger, it's like, oh yeah, birds migrate because it gets too cold here. True, yeah, a little bit, but not totally. Most birds, they can handle the cold. Feathers, most people don't realize, but feathers are actually better insulation than fur. Fur, well, it just doesn't have the locking capabilities that feathers do. Feathers actually link together, and they can act as a barrier against the cold. Anyone, raise your hand if you have ever worn a down jacket or had a down comforter. Okay, down is basically duck feathers. So that fluffy feathers that's underneath, and that's what keeps them warm. So they have these layers of feathers that are insulating. Oop, mourning dove, didn't hear them, very noisy. Just landed by my bird feeders. Anyhow, the birds are using their feathers to keep them nice and warm. So why not stick around? Well, food. That's the main purpose for migration. Lack of food. In the winter time up north, a lot of the food is under the snow. A lot of the plants have died off, the berries. So any birds that's a berry eater, they're migrating. Insectivores. You have all your warblers. I love the warblers. I love when springtime comes and all the warblers come back. But then in the wintertime, in the fall, they don't have food. Where's all the insects? Well, the insects are hibernating under the tree bark, or they're under the ground, or so the insects aren't as numerous. So the insectivores, they don't have as much food like the warblers. So they have to head to where the food is. Where's that? Where it's warm and the insects aren't hiding away the winter. So they head south. And if you remember my woodpecker episode, I talked about how the woodpecker will stick around. They don't usually migrate. And the reason that they don't migrate like the warblers do, even though they're an insectivore, they're eating insects, is they have the tools to get at where the insects are hiding away. Your nectar eating birds, such as hummingbirds, they're the same way. Where are they going to get nectar? There's no flowers in the wintertime. They've all died off. So the hummingbirds are actually gathering a lot of energy right now so that they can make the long trip down, cross the, well, first down south, and then they cross over the Gulf of Mexico and down into the Mexico and Belize and South America. So they've got a long trip too. They need to find food. So that is the whole reason for migration. Okay? It is not because of the cold. Well, see, once again, it is kind of because of the cold, because in the cold the plants disappear, the insects disappear, everything disappears, but it's not because they're like, brr, I'm cold, I need to find a warmer climate. Not like what we call the snowbirds here, you know, human snowbirds. No, they can handle the cold. A lot of them can, some can't. I mean, the smaller birds have trouble handling cold. Your chickadees, well, black-capped chickadees, they hang around in the winter, but they actually do what we call torpor. Torpor is kind of like a hibernation, so they go into like a temporary where they slow their body temperature down, and so that way they can handle the colds. But the cold means less food. So that's the main reason for migration. Why not all birds migrate then? Why do some, you know, stay around? Because migration is dangerous. I mean, you're traveling long distances. While you're traveling, you could starve to death, you know, not find food along your way. You're using a lot of energy. You have to replenish that energy. If you can't replenish that energy, then you're going to starve. You know, you have to watch out for power lines. A lot of birds get killed with power lines, especially during migration. You have more predators. You know, the predators are out there. They know that you're moving. You're not paying attention. You could get eaten. If you're traveling at the wrong time, heat exhaustion. You know, it's a dangerous thing. But it's more dangerous if you stay here sometimes. And that's why some birds migrate, some don't. The ones who can handle, find food, they can handle staying in the area, they will, because it's too dangerous to migrate. And others, like I said, short migrations, so that works too. Now, it's been under a lot of scientific research. There's still research in it, but they do have a lot of good answers as to how the birds navigate. How does a bird navigate? You know, you're going from this point to that point. You know, how do they know where to go? Well, first of all, there's several things that they use. The stars, for one. I mean, just like the old ships when they traveled across the ocean and they didn't have all the technology that we have today. You know, they were using the sextants, they call them, where they were watching the stars, and that would pinpoint their location on the map. And yeah, so they were watching the stars. The birds do the same. They follow the stars. They also use the sun. A lot of birds fly at night, though, so it depends on whether they're flying at night or during the day as to whether they're using the stars or the sun. And of course, they have found that birds use the Earth's magnetism as well. They have a way of sensing the magnetic field on the Earth, and that allows them to find their directions. Now they have also found that some birds will use landmarks during their navigation. So they're looking for different mountain ranges, maybe rivers, valleys, different geological features. They're also looking at some man-made features as well. Sometimes they're going through the cities. Now, that's why lights will often kind of mess them up. So city lights, it kind of alters their navigation because it blocks out the stars from showing. But yeah, they're using landmarks, all sorts of things to navigate. And all these together will help them get from point A to point B every single year using the same route. Now, a lot of birds will actually return back in the spring. They'll return back to where they were born. I've actually found that with bird banding. When I do bird banding during maps, I will catch birds that were born there the year before, and I know they're not sticking around, like bluebirds. Bluebirds will stick around through the winter. They're finding enough food, but most of them will migrate. They'll head south. But the next year, they'll come back. Warblers, I've banded baby warblers before, very young, first-year birds, and I recapture them like the next year or the year after, and they're adults, but they came back to where they were born. So they're coming back to the same area. Most birds will do that. So during my bird banding, I prove it all the time. And bird banders, that's one of the things that they help with this research, is to see where birds are going, where they're coming back to. And they have found that they come back to the same place. Now, most birds will migrate at night. So that's why you don't see a lot of birds in big groups heading, down south in the fall, back up in the spring, to the north. No, you don't see these big groups because they're out at nighttime. Yeah, we do see some out during the day, like geese. Geese love migrating during the day. You also see vultures, the turkey vultures, the black vultures. They migrate in large groups during the day. But most birds, songbirds especially, they migrate at night. And there's a couple of reasons. First of all, it's cooler. You don't have to worry as much about heat exhaustion. Instead, it's cooler, so you can travel further distances, you don't get overheated, and there's fewer predators out at night as well. So you don't have to worry as much about the predators. So that's why most birds fly at night. There was a gentleman that when I was doing some bird banding training, I ran into a researcher who was actually studying the calls of birds at night and how, they're communicating for migration and for other reasons too. So it was pretty interesting. The geese, when they're flying during the day, but they're conserving energy by flying in that V formation that we always see. So they're in that V formation because the guy in the front, he's getting all the wind. He's getting exhausted very quickly. The other birds behind him, they're getting the drag. Yeah, the wind drag. He's basically creating this V shape with the wind, and the other birds are taking advantage of that because they don't have as much wind drag on them. And then as the guy in the front gets exhausted, he moves to the back so he can relax, and that moves someone up to the front. And they keep making this transition to a new leader constantly. So it's not the same leader the whole time. And the whole reason is to save energy. Now, like I said, about 2,000 of the 11,000 bird species do migrate in the world. So that leaves a lot that are not migrating. According to the United Nations, 1 in 8 bird species is threatened globally because of habitat loss, oil spills, power lines, pollution, and climate change. The migratory birds are having a tough time with this. And it's because they are moving from one place to another. The migratory water birds, they're the most at risk. And the reason is because the wetlands are disappearing. It's hard for them to find wetlands to dip down into on their migration. So they're having to travel even further. So migrating is actually very dangerous, I said before, but because of all these threats, more birds are having difficulty migrating. And that's why 1 in 8 bird species is threatened. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about birds migrating, but I want you to know there are other animals that migrate too. You can use that term, not just for birds, but whenever I think migration, when someone says migration to me, I'm always thinking birds. But there are other animals that migrate. Insects, mammals. I mean, if you think about it, the monarch butterfly, yeah, that's one we always think about as, oh, where'd they go in the wintertime? They just died out. No, they migrate. The monarch butterfly will travel like 3,000 miles from North America all the way down to Mexico, which is where they stay for the winter, where it's much warmer. I remember several years ago there was a hurricane that went through Mexico and it wiped out the region where all the monarchs go to. There's a mountainous region where all the monarchs go, and this hurricane just devastated the monarch population. We didn't see many monarchs the next year. Now the population has improved, so they are, making a comeback, and there are a lot of monarchs around again, but it's tricky. With climate change, more hurricanes, it can be dangerous for them. Now the longest migration of a mammal, yes, mammals migrate too. The longest migration of a mammal is the humpback whale, who migrates about 16,000 miles from the Antarctica feeding grounds to the breeding grounds of the tropics. Sea turtles migrate. I had a friend who actually did some research during college, tagging sea turtles, and they're going out in the evening catching sea turtles along the beach and checking their tags and recording all the data and weighing them. And but anyhow, they do migrate. The sea turtle, they use magnetic fields to return to their birthplace to lay their own eggs. So they're constantly coming back to the same place year after year. Fish migrate. Yeah, the waters get cold, so they have to migrate, or they're migrating to raise their young. A lot of times with animals who are not as food sensitive to the temperatures and temperature sensitive, they're migrating more for breeding grounds to wintering grounds, or so like salmon. They use, very interesting, they use their sense of smell to migrate. They go from the ocean to the river where they were born. So they work their way up the river and they lay their own eggs in there, and they usually die up there too. So fish are migrating as well. Longest land migration. Anyone know who that is? It's a mammal. Okay, longest land migration is 2,000 miles by caribou. And they migrate in these really large groups. Long migration, 2,000 miles for the caribou. Walruses migrate. Now the interesting thing about walruses, when they're migrating, they do it in large groups too, but the males and the females, they migrate in separate herds. Yeah, they're migrating not together, they're migrating separately. I saw a program on penguins the one time and their migration, and how often the males will leave first. I think it was, I would have to look that up. I forgot to research that. I apologize. It just popped in my head suddenly. But one group will leave early, and then the next group will leave after that. So you have males and females with penguins doing the same thing. Dragonflies. Most people don't realize it, but dragonflies migrate as well. Up in the Northeast here, dragonflies don't stick around in the winter. I always used to think when I was younger that they just died off in the winter. But then what happens with them having new dragonflies, Do they give birth and then they die off, or are the eggs staying over the... No, they actually migrate. There's about 16 species of dragonflies in North America who migrate. They go from Canada and the northern U.S. all the way down to Mexico or other Gulf Coast areas. Some will migrate all the way down to the West Indies. And during this time, this is the interesting thing. This is the same thing with monarch butterflies too. They will go through several generations. So with the dragonflies, these species that are migrating, you will get over 3 generations during the migration. So they'll lay eggs along the migration, then they die off, the eggs will hatch, those new dragonflies, they will migrate further down, and then they will start heading back after the winter, and then they will die off after they've laid eggs. So you're getting different generations. You have a completely different generation return than the one that left the area. So it's pretty interesting how they do the generations. And monarch butterflies, same thing. You know, you're not getting the same monarchs returning. They don't live that long. So they do go through these generations. And dragonflies, another interesting thing about them is when they migrate in large groups. So obviously, as you can tell, there's a lot more than just birds migrating. There's a lot of different animals, from insects to whales to caribou. So all different kinds of animals migrate every single year. Remember, migration is mostly for food, but it can be for other reasons. It can be because they lost habitat. So we have to take care of our planet in order to help the animals. They're having a tougher time out there with climate change, with human interactions, with habitat loss. So let's try to take care of the planet a little better. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about migration, and get out and enjoy the fall. I know winter is coming. I don't like when people hibernate in the winter, so hopefully you're preparing too for the colder winter months. But enjoy the summer while we got it, and start enjoying the fall as it comes in and it sneaks into your area as well as Western New York. And get out and explore nature. So share this episode, share the podcast with your friends so that they can start learning more about nature and the environment around them. And don't forget to support the podcast. All the links are in the show notes. Biggest way you can support the podcast is by sharing it with friends, but also you can contribute to my Ko-Fi page or buy some Nature Wanderer merch. I have a link to the merch store in the show notes, as well as a link for buying nature journals on Amazon. So if you're on Amazon, go to the Amazon books and put in the search for Paul Feringer Nature Journals, and you should be able to find them right there. But there's a link in the show notes. That's the easy way to do it. I hope you enjoyed your listening, and above all, don't forget, keep exploring the nature around you. Have a great day, everyone.
Did you know that plastic is made with oil, a fossil fuel that pollutes the environment? And did you know that only about 15% of all plastic is recycled into new products? Wouldn't it be awesome if we could live our lives without plastic so that we could stop harming the planet? Well, there's a company that wants to help you do just that. Life Without Plastic sells products that will reduce or eliminate your dependence on plastic. They have a large selection, from toothbrushes to food storage containers to drinking straws, all plastic free. And it's reasonably priced. So what are you waiting for? Check out all these great plastic-free products and help save the planet. Just click on the link in the show notes to find out more and to start your journey to being plastic-free.